Right,
So,
Charles. So here we are.
right.
We met at last. And can you tell us where we are exactly? Where
Well,
is this
Gordon,
place?
we're in Newton Stewart, just beside the River Cree, and it's a nice, pleasant day. And you can turn it. That's right. You can turn it around, and you can see the River Cree. So here we are. We're just going to have a chat, right?
We're going to have a chat because we've known each other for a couple of years, and
Yeah,
we both stood for the Scottish Family
we did.
Party, and we campaigned because we feel that families are being undermined.
Definitely.
Um,
Yeah.
what would you say would be the one of the main causes of families being undermined at the moment?
Well, my position really, and it's taken me a while to come round to this because it's not an easy idea. It's the result of deliberate policy.
A deliberate
Yeah,
policy.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And the reason I think this is because looking back in history and from what I'm reading about Marxism, the destruction of the family, the nuclear family, was one of the aims of the Marxists who decided back in the 1920s that they were going to take over the West and we're going to destroy the West. So how are we going to destroy the West? They had to destroy the family.
Right, and of course, in our our Scottish history is very rich and very well developed. And while there's been a sympathy, perhaps, to, I would think, a shared ownership idea in the Scottish tradition, there has been such a strong religious foundation. And I know you know quite a bit about that. Would you like to discuss a little bit about our religious foundation here in Scotland?
Well, in Scotland, of course, it's generally assumed that Columba came to Iona way back. But in actual fact, we live in an area here, about 30 miles south of here, is Whithorn. And 100 years before Columba, Ninian arrived. He had been, I think, the son of a local Roman governor or whatever. I'm not 100% sure about that, but certainly he was
You're
in a
talking about
family.
the 390s, is that
Yeah,
right? It
390s,
is
yes.
AD. So it's
Yeah,
not long after Constantine declared
yeah. Constantine became emperor,
declared.
what, 312 or something or other.
Yeah.
So, and Christianity then became accepted in the Roman Empire, and it was surprising to me that 397 Ninian arrived here. He'd lived here, he'd gone to Rome, he'd come back. I don't quite know, maybe a couple of years in Rome, and then he came back. And he ended up in Whithorn, about 30 miles away, and he obviously had a big impact because over the centuries, Whithorn became a place of pilgrimage
Pilgrimage, yes.
based on
I
St. Ninian.
I think he had a foundation called Candida Casa
His
there.
house,
That was
yes.
his house. It
The
was the White House,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And it became a very important centre for converting the Celts.
The pagans, yeah, yeah.
I think sometimes we over romanticize the Celts. We have to remember that Scotland was plagued by tribalism
Yeah.
and kidnapping, and I have to say there was headhunting in those days. You intimidated your opponents by placing their enemy heads on your parapets.
Oh, right,
Yeah,
yes,
that
yeah.
was the idea. And so we shouldn't romanticize the Celts too much, although I do believe the Druids were wise and maybe they knew the rules and they studied astronomy and they were clever and they carried on the traditions. And they were arbitrators, I believe. But I think the Christians had a big impact on the Druids.
Yes, yes. Well, actually, there's a story about King Brood in Inverness, and apparently Columba, after he had arrived in Iona, which was about 497 or something like that, I'm not quite sure, but certainly about 100 years after Ninian. But anyway, Columba travelled round and he met King Brood in Inverness, who was a pagan, and really had a big impact on Brood, and I think converted Brood at that time. So Christian, and I think really when you start with a pagan notion, and you then get the information about Christianity and how it's different, I think it's quite an attractive picture.
I think this early Christianity appealed to the tribes because the early, they call it the Celtic Christianity, but it came under Roman influence. But because we're far away from Rome, there was a certain freedom, and there was an integration, this idea of holy wells, holy water.
Yeah, yeah.
The Druids, of course, they had their oak trees and their mistletoe, kind of reverence for nature and
Yeah.
nature's cycles. And I think that fitted in well with the cycles in Christianity, the birth of Jesus, Holy Easter, etc.
Yeah.
Would you agree on that? Yeah.
Well, I think in terms of cycles, because back then the weather and the climate had such a major, you know, and the seasons of the years, that obviously dominated society. So there was a very strong connection to the natural environment, which we, I think, have lost to a great extent.
Yeah, we had hopes of the Green Movement in Britain, but unfortunately, the Green Movement has been taken over by, shall we say, it's been undermined by, well, a group that has a lot of letters to its name, which I don't want to mention, but I'm sure you know who that group is, and people watching this can guess. And now if we leave the early efforts of establishing Christianity here, it had a huge development, and then we go on to the Middle Ages, and then of course we had the rules of chivalry, which I liked.
Yes.
The restraint on the knights, what they can do, what's lawful, what they can't do, how women and children and the priests and bishops were protected, and how the knights acted like a police force, and that was a sacred duty, and they had to go through a long ceremony, fasting and blessing in the church, and they had their weapons blessed, and they had to restrain themselves. Of course, it didn't always work.
Yeah.
But if we skip the Reformation and the Protestant Reformation and the wars of religions and come on to today, we both agree that we're finding we're finding that we've become untethered from the best of our traditions, and this is leading to a crisis, especially here in Britain, and I would say in the West generally. What would you say to that?
Yes, well, getting back to what you said about the environmental thing, I mean, we were all environmentalists to start with. You know, we all believed in protecting the planet and recycling things and doing all that. But unfortunately, if you like, the money side of things, you know, the consumerism, you know, the profit making, you know, things have been done which are not environmental. So you get huge amounts of plastic and all sorts of things. But in addition, you have, as you said, Gordon, this green movement, which has really used the green movement, because we were all in favour of green energy and green policies. But when you look at the green movement now, they're much more political and less environmental. So it seems to me they have been hijacked, and their agenda is, I think, quite destructive.
Mm-hmm. And here, if we move on, we've both been teachers, and we've both worked with many teachers and with children and with various administrations. But our belief is, and it's a Christian message, not just a Christian message, but it's a general message to nurture your children and see your grandchildren come forth, your own children and your grandchildren. And what we've seen recently in Ukraine, Russia, in Gaza particularly, in Israel itself, and especially in Iran recently, is this deliberate attack on schools and children.
Yes.
And this I find disgusting. And it's been building up, and I talked about it in the past about 3 years ago, and now we see a complete disregard, and almost like they take a delight in it. That is really worrying. What do you think about that, Charles?
Well, getting back to what you said, Gordon, about the knights, the chivalry, and the fact that it wasn't always best. You know, there were things that happened, but generally there was this notion about the knight and chivalry, and it was a good thing, and particularly the protection of women. And now we're in a situation where...
And that goes to Christianity, isn't it? Where especially in the Catholic tradition, the holiness of the mother
Oh yes.
And I
Yes.
noticed this recently in Spain. It reminded me of what maybe being brought up as a Protestant, maybe what we had lost. We had lost that idea because, as you know, in the Protestant church, Mary's not exalted. She's kind of to the side a little bit.
Well, she's certainly inferior, but
Uh,
she's venerated, which is not the same as worship. She's not worshipped. I mean, Jesus is worshipped, but Mary was his mother.
yes, in the
And
Catholic tradition,
yes,
she's
that's right.
venerated.
And the thing is also in the Protestant and the Catholic traditions, it's accepted and taught very strongly that Mary was a virgin, so that Jesus was born. It was a virgin birth. So obviously that is not something that is easily acceptable to people of other faiths, but it's certainly a fundamental part of Christianity right through. So we have this notion about the protection of women, and we look back to Our Lady particularly because, again, in the Christian tradition, she is regarded as Jesus being God himself, perfect, never committed a sin, and the same thing for Our Lady, you see. So it's very different, and it's not easy to accept. I can understand that entirely, but certainly you have this this attitude towards women, which to me is much better than you see in other places. Because if you go back to the ancient Greeks and the Romans and all sorts of stuff, they had to appease their pagan gods. How did they do it? Well, they sacrificed virgins, So it was the complete opposite, really, back then.
I might disagree with you slightly there. I would say that I've looked again at Spartans and Athens and Thebes. I don't have much truck with Thebes. I think they lost
Okay.
the way.
Okay.
I think the Athenians became corrupt, and even some of
Yeah.
the Athenians had said that. I kind of admire Sparta. In fact, in Sparta itself, women had quite strong rights. They had land ownership. They could pass on their land to people they chose.
Okay.
The girls were allowed to go out and exercise, and would tease their men to go and fight in battle and come back either with their shields
Or on it,
dead on their
yes.
shields. Perhaps a bit too hard, maybe, but it was.
Well, that was the culture,
That
you
was
know?
the culture. But so Christianity came along, and I think what it does, it kind of it softened the hardness and the edges and brought people to a right condition. This is what I feel of early Christianity, the message and the blessings and the healings especially. This is still a bit of a mystery, but when people go to holy sites, they come away and they feel refreshed. And perhaps there is something coming from the spirit world, the Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
which helps them. But now, as I say, we're in a bit of a crisis. And I see today
Oh, yeah.
you brought along
So
a book.
There you are.
What
What
it?
is Truth by John Shackelfree. This is a book that really talks about the current situation in the world and the fact that everything seems to be collapsing, and it tries to go into some sort of explanation of why it's happening, and the reader then can sort of think about, well, why is it happening? What can we do? It's really left up to the reader, but basically it tries to give some sort of explanation for the decline that we're seeing.
I think now it's certainly been recognised that we're in a decline. I think I'm talking to friends and relatives. Sometimes they accept that there's a difficulty. Sometimes, though, I think they don't want to go there. They get feelings of discomfort and angst, when we look at the media now, we realize it's mostly lies.
Yeah, a lot of it. And certainly, if it's not particularly lies, it's certainly certain things are not being informed. We're not being informed about certain things. And on the other side, things that we are being informed of, a spin is put on it, which is misinformation. The obvious one at the moment, which we agree about, Gordon, is that is with Ukraine. It's quite obvious that Ukraine has lost the war. It will never win the war. And we still have European leaders saying, well, we've got to go to war to destroy Russia and save Ukraine. So there's a double narrative there. We're on one side and the mainstream media are on the other side. We just hope people will see. I mean, Russia has taken about 10% of Ukraine, and there's, you know, Ukraine is maybe trying little skirmishes or whatever, but they're completely ineffective, really. So
Yes, and Russia has a great civilization. They've had a lot of turmoil. They're determined to keep their civilization going, and despite its faults, like all countries and political groups and nations have their weak points, but they've got a strong tradition of holding fast to their families, providing the best. The communists reformed themselves, I think, and they want to hold on to the republics, and they don't accept the woke agenda.
no,
They've rejected it completely and said that the woke agenda, which you and I both agree, is one of the reasons why the West is falling down.
yes,
Because it's an agenda that is of absolute confusion. We have now in Scotland, we have children as young as 7 and 8 being indoctrinated and being told in lessons, and teachers are almost forced to do this, to teach that they can choose their gender.
yes.
And Charles, you and I have been teaching all these years. Children can't
No,
even
no.
understand, what being a boy and a girl is. They're still learning that.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think this, if this to me is satanic. Okay, we've got a lot of bots here coming down
Which part
to
of
see
it,
us. Okay,
yeah.
this is a very worrying. I think it's the rock bottom, isn't it?
Yes, I think
when
so.
the children are being attacked like
Yes,
this.
yes, yes. And I think really, when you look at that particular thing, when you've got primary school teachers encouraging kids as young as 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 to question their own gender, that is just not true. And it tells us something about our culture where that idea is not simply presented, but is being forced upon children and saying, this is real. Well, anybody knows that it is not real, and it's very, very destructive. So that one thing, I think, encompasses the destruction of and the decline of Western civilization.
Right, Charles. Well, this has been a nice, enlightening talk.
Yeah, very.
And I wish you well and a speedy recovery.
Indeed, yes.
And I'm hoping that we'll slowly get this message out, and that we'll find a peaceful way to get our Scottish common sense back.
Yes, that would be nice. Yeah.